pull this apart for us, mental health and emotional health. You're very careful to speak about emotional health, which I appreciate. What's the nuance there?
Well, I mean, I think when we talk about mental health, we're typically talking about diagnosable conditions. And these are things that obviously people are familiar with, depression, anxiety, things of that nature. But of course, it also includes more severe conditions, schizophrenia, bipolar, hypomania, or personality disorders, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. These things all probably fit somewhere under the umbrella of mental health. Emotion and those are very significant, right? So the prevalence of these things within the population to varying degrees is significant. And it's not necessarily always to the point where it's pathological, right? I mean, a person can have some anxiety and it not be a pathological condition. So, the system does tend to pathologize these things a bit. I know nothing about that system. So there's nothing there's nothing I write about, there's nothing I speak about there. I know nothing about that. That is not my field of training. What I'm really talking about is something that's a little more broad and something that every person ought to be considering, which is emotional health. And emotional health, while inclusive of mental health, should there be mental health issues, is probably a lot broader. And it probably includes more. It includes, for example, happiness and joy, fulfillment, sense of purpose, the state of one's relationships, not just with others, but with oneself. These things are probably the lattice upon which one really defines the quality of their life. In other words, if the state of affairs in emotional health is poor, it's hard to make up for it, if not impossible, with anything else.
I want to double click. Like what you just said is really powerful because we try to solve that with infinite number of charlatan hacks, and that's really
not even
important.
Charlatan hacks. I mean, I think we would all try to solve those things. We would all try to fill a void there with other things that on the surface seem reasonable: work, money, success, shallow friendships, the approval of others. There's all sorts of things that we will try to use to fill a void if there is indeed a void there. And I think if most people are being honest and they think about it, they realize that nothing else matters if that is in disarray. And therefore, that's why I felt that at least warranted some discussion in a book on longevity.
It feels like, as a mental health guy, it feels like a more honest representation of what the mental health diagnostics are attempting to do, which is paint a picture of an arc of behavior or an arc of a body responding. But emotional health seems like a much more honest way to look at it. But again, it's hard to codify that and to reimburse for how much joy do you have versus how many times have you felt anxious in the last 6 months. That's a golly, man. I think that is paradigm reframing in a really powerful way, because if I'm seeking joy and I'm seeking beauty and I'm seeking happiness and I'm seeking good relationships, that's going to impact movement and sleep and metabolic health and eating, and also staying up too late and having some beers when a buddy comes into town. It's going to impact all of that that feels like window number one and not window number afterthought after you get all these other things lined up.
That's completely true. So I think that those are basically different sides of the same coin. So on the one hand, if that emotional house is not in order, for many people, not for all, but for many people, it becomes difficult to take care of their physical health as well. And many of the behaviors that are self-destructive to one's physical health, whether it be with respect to food, exercise, drugs, antisocial behavior, all of these things stem from a breakdown in that emotional health bucket. Yeah. And then similarly, that breakdown is also leading to just misery. So now you have poor physical health and poor emotional health, but the core problem is often the same.
And I guess the heartbreaking part for me, and I know you've sat with countless patients just kneecap to kneecap, is when the ticker tape running underneath your life is that you're worthless or you're a piece of crap or it's your fault that your parents fill in the blank. Choosing misery is that makes sense. That's a deserved punishment for your life. And so there's this really important need to change some of those core messages so that I believe I've got value beyond misery, or I don't have a picture for what non-misery life looks like. My mom smoked, my dad smoked, my dad yelled, my mom left us every couple of weeks. That's just that's the picture I got. That's the scale. And being able to paint a new picture that says, man, there's something else here. It's just tough, man.
Yeah. And I think it's all of that. And I think it's also believing that you can change the current state internally. I mean,
Yeah.
right. So it's one thing to think, yeah, I can get out of this situation, but a lot of times you can escape one situation. You find yourself in a better place by external metrics, but the internal milieu is the same. And I think that's the harder one to confront. And I think it's also the harder one for people, certainly for me, to believe that there's plasticity there, that thing can change.
There's been few scarier moments than last year. My wife and I sat on our front porch out here. We live on some acres out here in Nashville, overlooking our dream. We had a financial year that neither of our families, just like family trees, could have imagined. And we just lost a friend. Our marriage was pretty tough, man. Like it's tough to think because I really hedged my bets on these metrics, and they didn't, like the amount of money in the account and the amount of this, it didn't come through. And it's harrowing. A guy like me thinking I got all the answers and I got there and it wasn't there, right? What's that old saying? Like, I went with me, right? I showed up there too. And until I deal with that guy, there's no dollar amount that brings peace to my home, right?